Good morning, and we start with a Fox News alert. Arizona Senator John McCain has passed away at the age of 81.
The senator, war hero, and former Republican presidential nominee losing his year-long battle with brain cancer.
He went home to Arizona for treatment in December. Then on Friday, Senator McCain's family announced he was discontinuing treatment. He passed away Saturday afternoon, just days before his 82nd birthday.
Good morning, and we have obviously a sad day, but also a day that we look back and remember really a remarkable legacy of service to the entire McCain family. We've been talking about it overnight in our breaking news coverage. John McCain, 60 years of service, including his military time, his time in the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, of course, a presidential candidate twice, nominee in 2008. But his father and grandfather were also Navy admirals. He was a Navy fighter pilot, obviously a POW in Vietnam for 5.5 years. Just a remarkable legacy of service that he leaves behind.
You know, it is a morning to wake up and really be grateful that we had such a patriot, a man who gave so much of his life to service, and the remarkable things he did that embody and personify the American spirit. Tucker Carlson did an obit package, and he looks back on the legacy of Senator John McCain.
John Sidney McCain III was born in 1936 on a military base in the Panama Canal Zone to one of the most prominent families in the United States Navy. McCain's grandfather accepted the Imperial Japanese surrender aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay in 1945. His father, also a four-star general, later commanded all American naval forces in the Pacific. After graduating from Episcopal High School in Virginia, McCain followed their lead, entering the Naval Academy in the class of 1958. By the time war broke out in Vietnam, McCain was an aviator, having already bailed out of 2 airplanes during training. In June of 1967, he nearly lost his life for a 3rd time. A rocket aboard the aircraft carrier Forrestal went off accidentally and struck his plane as it idled on deck. 134 sailors died, but McCain rolled through the flames to safety.
I felt this tremendous blow to my airplane and saw the fire coming out, so I probably had reacted a little more quickly than those in the planes near me. Some of those in the planes near me didn't survive.
4 months later, his luck ran out. On October 26, 1967, during a daytime bombing mission over downtown Hanoi, McCain's plane was hit by a missile he later described as like a flying telephone pole. Gravely injured during ejection, McCain landed in a lake in front of thousands of angry North Vietnamese civilians, one of whom stabbed him in the groin with a bayonet. Authorities dragged McCain in chains to Hoa Lo Prison, later dubbed the Hanoi Hilton. To this day, there is a statue of John McCain on the banks of the lake where he was shot down, celebrating his capture.
He was terribly injured, fractured arms, broken knee, left arm was out of the socket. He had not been fed, and basically he was starving to death.
McCain's captors soon discovered he was an admiral's son, and they offered him early release as a propaganda coup. McCain refused, showering his guards with defiant profanity. He spent the next 3 years in solitary confinement being tortured with ropes. The experience pushed him repeatedly to the edge of death. He was sustained by fellow American prisoners with whom he communicated by tapping in code on the walls of the prison. One of those men was Medal of Honor recipient Air Force Colonel Bud Day.
Bud Day was the most steadfast, the most inspirational, and the toughest of anybody that I must have something to do with his Iowa upbringing.
McCain was finally released in 1973 to a hero's welcome back in America, but his health and his marriage were permanently damaged. To the end of his life, he could never fully raise his arms, and though as a rule he never mentioned it, he sometimes needed help to brush his hair and dress. In 1981, he retired from the Navy as a captain and moved to Arizona to marry Cindy Hensley, a teacher from a prominent Phoenix family. Encouraged by Ronald Reagan to run for Congress, McCain spent 2 terms in the House of Representatives before being elected to the Senate in 1986. McCain held that seat for 31 years. He became one of the most energetic and visible politicians in America, famous both for his subversive sense of humor and his savage temper. After a brush with scandal in 1989 during the savings and loan meltdown, McCain developed into a champion of campaign finance reform. The McCain-Feingold Law, passed in 2001, is maybe his signature legislative achievement. Although less well-known, McCain also spent decades working on behalf of American Indian tribes and airline deregulation, two of his personal passions. In 1999, McCain began a run for president. He crisscrossed the primary states for the better part of a year in an aging tour bus he called the Straight Talk Express. He was accompanied by former POWs and a star-struck press corps who were awed by the candidate's wit and candor and the reckless, exuberant way he ran. For a brief period, it looked like McCain might win the nomination. He beat George W. Bush in the New Hampshire primary by 19 points that year, but his seat-of-the-pants challenge collapsed soon after, and he conceded in March of 2000, returning to the Senate. McCain soon emerged as a leading voice on American foreign policy. He helped lead the charge for George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq in 2003, as well as for the bitterly debated troop surge in that country several years later. At the end of Bush's second term, McCain once again announced his candidacy for president. This time, he won the nomination. In a surprise move at the Republican convention in Minneapolis, McCain introduced his running mate, Alaska Governor Sarah Palin. He later conceded he barely knew Palin. Her addition boosted the ticket for a time, but in the end, unified media support for his opponent and a historic financial collapse that voters blamed on the Republican donor class proved insurmountable. McCain lost that race definitively in November. McCain's concession speech that year revealed as much about him as anything he ever said in public. Beneath the aviator's bluster and his legendary temper lay a bedrock of decency and a total commitment to good manners in the face of defeat.
Senator Obama and I have had and argued our differences, and he has prevailed. No doubt many of those differences remain. These are difficult times for our country, and I pledge to him tonight to do all in my power to help him lead us through the many challenges we face.
Back in the Senate, McCain retook his place as the most powerful voice for neoconservative foreign policy, expanded American military commitments abroad, nation building, the spread of democratic government. He rallied for military intervention in Libya against Muammar Gaddafi. He pushed for political reform in Egypt. He called for regime change in Syria. He became one of the few elected officials willing to argue for more American troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Even as he remained ferociously hawkish on foreign affairs, McCain, like his hero and friend Arizona Democrat Mo Udall, moved steadily leftward on domestic matters, notably immigration. By the time the Republican Party nominated Donald Trump in the summer of 2016, McCain seemed close to a complete break with his own party. He pulled his endorsement of Trump and became one of the new president's most persistent critics. For a man battered by physical suffering in his early decades, McCain spent the second half of his life in hale health. He kept a travel schedule that would have exhausted seasoned athletes. He beat melanoma in 2000 and bore the scars on his face to prove it. But his final illness, an incurable brain tumor, could not be stopped. As news of his cancer was announced, McCain's colleagues in both parties acknowledged that Congress was losing a singular man.
You are defined by your courage, and you're redeemed by your loyalty. Courage and loyalty. I can think of no better description of the man we're honoring tonight, my friend John McCain.
The one thing that I like most about John McCain, he doesn't run away from the shortcomings. When you balance out John McCain's life, is something we admire. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been very lucky to be in his shadow and to be his friend.
John McCain is survived by his wife Cindy, 7 children, and his mother Roberta, who is 106 years old and every bit as tough as her son.
And it's wonderful that Tucker ended on Roberta McCain, who is 106 years old, still alive, very strong woman. I think about Cindy McCain, his spouse, who's also a very strong woman and fights human trafficking all around the world. She has issues that she cares deeply about and has not just been a quote-unquote political spouse. Yeah. And I think about all of the children, but especially Meghan McCain, who has been part of the Fox family. And Rachel, you spent a lot of time working with her, a very strong woman just like you are.
Thank you. And she is a strong woman and clearly her father's daughter in that regard. I want to take a moment. This package was so beautifully done. And I think probably John McCain's final finest moment was that concession speech with Barack Obama. And I think he really set the standard of how to concede after a very tough, hard-fought election. And that really touched me. He's famously once said, "What have we to lose by trying to work together to find solutions? We're not getting much done apart." That kind of simple talk that we really need right now at a time when we need to bring our country together. With regard to Meghan, you know, one of the things that we don't hear a lot talked about with him is his really remarkably consistent pro-life record. That's something that Meghan also is championing, and something we don't hear much about, but she is one of the greatest voices for life in the millennial generation. And her father's record on life, boy, pro-lifers really loved it.
There's a lot of layers to the story we'll be getting to over the next 4 hours.
Quite something. In Arizona late last night, a procession near Senator McCain's ranch to honor Senator McCain.
And soon Americans will have the opportunity to pay their respects. Alicia Cunha is in Phoenix with more.
Good morning, Alicia.
Good morning to all of you. And as you would expect, multiple services and ceremonies are expected to honor the late Senator John McCain here in his home state. There will be church services, and he will also lie in state here in the Capitol building. Not long after the passing of this American hero, we saw a motorcade leave his family ranch in Cornville, Arizona. That is about 90 minutes north of Phoenix. Those who knew him know that that home was a sanctuary to McCain and his family. He represented the people of Arizona and Washington for 36 years, and when news surfaced of his passing, some paid tribute outside his home and the mortuary where his body was brought last night. From here, the nation will have the opportunity to pay its respects. Senator McCain is expected to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington. That will happen later this week. After that, he will receive a full dress funeral service at the Washington National Cathedral, where Vice President Mike Pence is reportedly going to attend. McCain will then be laid to rest at the cemetery at the U.S. Navy Academy at Annapolis. This was a wish he expressed some time ago, that his final resting place be his alma mater, where his storied military career began. His father and grandfather, both four-star Navy admirals, are buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Back to you guys.
All right, Alicia Cunha, we appreciate your reporting. We'll be getting back to you, no doubt.
Thank you, Alicia. You know, as Alicia points out, so Senator McCain will be only the 29th person in history to lie in state. He'll be taken into the Capitol Rotunda, as we saw with Reverend Billy Graham. Now, he lied in repose, which is just one level below state. But to see him honored with that flag and the honor guard that will stand guard around him for 24 hours as he lies there in state is really something, because of what he meant to the military and to thousands of even young people now that look back on what he did in Vietnam and the really defiance that earned him the nickname Maverick in the Senate.
And throughout this week, there'll be all kinds of tributes and remembrances, and we're going to have a chance this morning to talk to a lot of his friends and others who will help us remember. So next, we are going to talk to someone who met Senator McCain nearly 30 years ago when he volunteered to drive for him. It gave him a start in politics, the lessons learned, and how McCain prepared him for his own career in politics, as we honor the senator this morning on Fox and Friends.
I don't mind a good fight. For reasons known only to God, I've had quite a few tough ones in my life, but I learned an important lesson along the way. In the end, it matters less that you can fight. What you fight for is the real test.